Hello and welcome to another episode of Where Everybody Has Gone Before, a show where most of the time we roll a random wheel to find out what episode of Star Trek we're talking about, except on the odd occasion we don't. This week's one of those weeks where we've spun a wheel. I'm your host Laura. I'm here as ever with Geoffrey Bunting. How you doing?
I'm good, ready for another episode of Waigba.
I've never tried to pronounce the acronym before. That's a new one.
Well, I think that's how what we should call it from now on. Waigba.
Wegba. Yeah, you gotta
We should try and make that a thing
pronouncing
among
the
the very
H
few
is the
people that watch
tricky
this.
bit. You gotta Wegba.
That's way. It's like a.
Yeah,
A?
Wegba.
Yeah, it's an eh. Waigba.
Well,
There's something quite soothing about it.
it's now you bring it up. It's not a bad word at all. This episode we spun the random wheel of all the Star Treks we could have got, and this is, I think, the first time we've spun a repeat season. Not only have we spun a repeat version of Star Trek, it's very close to the last time we were in this Star Trek. We rolled.
Mate, the last time I rolled the dice,
Yeah,
I got season 5 of The Next Generation,
yeah,
and now I've just got season 5 of The Next Generation again.
yes.
So, I'm on a roll of very good.
Yeah,
The Next
season
Generation.
5 of Next Generation, pretty solid place to be. We rolled 212, which is season 5, episode 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This episode is called Disaster. And I think this episode is far from a disaster. I think this is a pretty charming episode.
I think it's a really well put together episode of dumping people with other people they don't normally spend a lot of time with in The Next Generation. If anything, the episode should be called Stuck, because everyone's stuck with someone, right? Picard's stuck with some kids, Geordie's stuck with Crusher, and some radiation. Troy's stuck in command where she really doesn't want to be, and then Riker's stuck with Data.
For an episode that has as much of its runtime as this is dedicated to young child actors, not nearly as insufferable as I was bracing for when I was like, oh, we're gonna have Picard locked in a room with crying children for a while.
I don't know, they're pretty annoying.
They're
not.
They're annoying, but they're annoying in a way that's like they parcel it out reasonably, and they have momentary breaks. I think that we're jumping into this a little early, but the oldest of the children, Melissa, does a good job of giving you just a little bit of buffer from the most annoying parts of child acting.
Well, I think they're annoying in the ways that children would be, and indeed are annoying. They're not annoying in that, wow, this kid really can't act and that's pissing me off.
They're annoying in the way that they have to be because Picard struggling with I don't know how to handle children kind of needs that abrasiveness. They're not annoying to me, the viewer. I can tell that they are being like this because that is how they need to act, not because they're a bad actor.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've jumped right into the middle of the episode.
Yes, we jumped right in there, but So the idea of this is we've got 5 different mini stories going on, but the gist is the ship flies into a space filament. The
quantum filament.
A quantum filament.
Got to get quantum in there.
Got to get quantum. Star Trek. Quantum filament, and that damages part of the hull. That means that all the bulkheads have to close, so everyone's locked where they are, and the warp core's going to breach. And also, there's an imminent pregnancy and some visiting children on a school trip, and everyone's locked in their own little sub-stories.
Yeah, it's just a really typical Star Trek at its best story, where everything starts off normal, it gets real fucked up, and then by the end of the episode, everything's back to normal. Which I quite like. It's quite a nice little. It's a good way to wash my brain out after delving into the worst episode of Academy 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So we kind of touched on it already, but the first one of these segmented stories we really get into is Picard and this group of children that won a science fair contest or something. You have we have Melissa, the girl one who we never find out what her science fair project actually was. There's the middle kid, the blonde one, who
the one who looks like Macaulay Culkin.
Yeah, the one who researched like the 20-hour life cycle of a moss. This kid's very obsessed with death. He's like, yeah, they die after 20 hours. And then the second he's in the elevator, he's like, we're gonna die, we're gonna die. I learned science about death and we're going to die. And
Yeah,
then,
and then Picard's just like, shut the fuck up, kid. Just stop crying. We're not gonna die. Just shut your fucking mouth.
and then
It's great.
yeah, and then you have the kid that Picard kind of humours that we don't really understand how he won the science fair. 'Cause he's like, I studied radishes, I put them in weird dirt, and they grew
No.
weird.
I've got the quote. I wrote the quote down because
Yeah.
this jumped out and she was like, I planted radishes in the special dirt and they came up all weird. And then the look on Picard's face is one of complete, what the fuck am I doing here with this child?
To jump forward a bit, I do love that Picard labels him official radish officer.
Yeah, his executive officer of radishes.
Yeah. As we say, at the beginning of this, Picard, he goes through a range of ways of trying to respond to these children, because initially it's, I'm going to treat you as small adults. Then it's, oh no, that's not working. I'm afraid to say anything to you because I don't know how. Then it becomes, I'm going to get actively angry at you for being small, scared children in a elevator that dropped quite a distance. Just simply, I'm used to having military people on my ship. Stop having emotions, small children.
And like the only way he can relate to them is to give them ranks. Is to
Yeah.
create a hierarchy in which he's still the captain. Can I just tell you what the first note I wrote down about this episode was?
What was the first note?
Because I'd forgotten I'd written this because I watched this 2 hours ago. My brain is just that frazzled. The first note was Daddy Picard and his velour jacket. Because he's got this like really like
Yeah,
really
yeah.
jacket on. It's like his like captain casual wear. And he's also like Daddy Picard, but in multiple contexts because there's kids there now.
You brought up the thing about the giving them ranks. Genuinely, that is one of my favorite parts of this little bit of storyline. Is him going, because like, sure, you could joke about it and go, he only knows how to interact with people via ranks, but also I do think it is genuinely a really good idea on his part to go, I'm gonna give you children like a sense of responsibility and authority in this situation, and to also go, Melissa, you seem like the child who is least scared, and I as an adult can most have a conversation with. The kids will listen to you because you're not like me, unable to talk to kids. Please be my person in the middle to keep them in line. I do think it works really well to set up to just distract them a little bit from the genuinely kind of scary situation they're in.
Yeah, well, I think it's also a little bit set up earlier because they're really keen to see all like the military stuff. They want to see the battle bridge.
Yeah.
And so he has this idea that they're interested in the Enterprise as a hierarchical military vessel, and he's like, no, we're going to go to astroponics and the biology lab, and they're all like, oh fuck that, I don't want to do that. So I don't think it's like a completely throwaway thing. I think it, and obviously once you get to the end of the episode, there is that joke about he says number one, and then both Riker and Melissa say yeah. I think it's a nice little train throughout the episode.
And letting the kids keep the pips at the end, I do think is a really sweet way to be like, you went through something kind of traumatizing. I'm gonna leave you with like a little memento so that you can go home and like this will be a happy memory for you, and not like that time you almost died in a lift shaft.
I would be really interested how like pips work in the sense of, so he's a captain, so he has 4 pips. Does that mean he has 4 pips, or does he have like a drawer of pips in case he loses one? Is there like just a, or does he replicate them? I suppose would be like,
so.
Can I have a pip hot
So
or whatever?
at the end of the episode, he does have his 4 pips back, despite them having their pips still. I assume this is there's a requisitions desk somewhere you can get more pips. And the only thing stopping someone from faking their number of pips is you would get in trouble if you lied and put the wrong number of pips on. It's like military. You're not just going to stick an extra pip on and pretend you're the captain.
I mean, O'Brien has loads of pips on, and he's not even a proper officer. So I think they do just kind of hand them out a little bit. Of course,
Uh,
O'Brien's like one of the other groups because
mm,
everyone's kind of split up, right? Because
yeah,
I think Riker, Data, and Worf are down in 10 forward
yep,
with Keiko O'Brien.
yep. Who is imminently
O'Brien leaves.
pregnanting.
She's so pregnant.
So pregnant.
O'Brien leaves because he has like duty or something. So
Yeah,
he's on the bridge with Troy, eventually Rolaran, and
yes.
some other dude who acts a bit like they pulled him off the street for this
Yeah,
episode.
we can ignore that
And then
he's
some
there.
lady who
It's
very quickly dies.
yeah, it's
Um,
O'Brien and Ensign and Troy basically on the bridge.
yeah, and the lady dies, who is like a junior lieutenant or something, and is apparently
Yeah,
the duty officer, and that means that Troy's in charge. And the look on Rolaran's face when O'Brien says, "Well, actually, technically, the ship's counselor is a lieutenant commander," is just priceless. Of holy fuck, I can't believe I'm gonna have to listen to this woman.
oh yeah, she makes no secret of the fact she does not respect chain of command. I think it is really notable that Rolaran does not address Troy a single time as captain, or even as her rank as lieutenant commander. She exclusively refers to her as counselor because she does not respect the reason she has her rank as like that's not an authentic reason to have that rank. I'm going to push back every chance I get against you.
Well, it's interesting because, like, for the first 4 seasons, Troy's kind of like a bit of a throwaway character. She doesn't really have a great deal to do. They try and redress that a bit going forward, but she's still kind of incompetent. So it's actually quite nice to see an episode where that incompetence actually becomes like an emotional linchpin of part of an episode. In
Yeah,
that you've got O'Brien, who clearly respects her and respects the chain of command, and then Rolaran, who's constantly questioning every decision she makes,
yeah.
and Troy's just like, I am so out of my depth, and I'm just going to pretend that I know what I'm doing and mostly listen to O'Brien.
But I will note that I don't think it's the most unbelievable thing in the world that someone who acts as the ship's counselor would have a reasonable sense of the kind of decision making that's needed in command. Because like you have to assume anytime someone in the command structure has a really stressful mission where they're having to do there's no way to know for certain which is the right decision. I made a decision and maybe it worked out right, maybe it worked out wrong, but I'm having to wrestle with what if I've made the other side. Troy's who they're going to end up chatting to, and I imagine she has had a fair amount of listening through the decision making process of senior officers in tough positions. Obviously, that's, not directly a replacement for command training, but I think that there is something to be said for this is not going to be the first time she has had to think about questions like what do you do if maybe the rest of the ship is alive, maybe it's dead, you have to make a judgment call on whether to stay or go. You've listened to probably a lot of the senior command talk through how they think through those things.
Well, she's also just she's sat next to Picard and Riker for
Yeah.
5 seasons at this point, and she's, I mean, is she telepathic? I know I can never work out what
I
what
believe
base
she
stories
is.
are, whether they're
Yeah.
telepathic or just empathetic. But like she can sense how people feel, right? She can
Yeah.
hear their thoughts, so she kind of knows some of that. I do find it a little bit odd that she's so out of her depth, despite being a commander. You'd think there'd be some actual officer training there, but then
Yeah.
I do think I thought this episode was the episode where she refuses to kill Geordie in like all the exams she's doing.
Yeah.
So we have had that episode before where we've seen how much she struggles with command decisions and
but
quite important decisions. But I would also say I don't think anything Rolaran says is wrong, and I think that's what's really good about this.
Yeah.
Like she makes very, very good arguments about essentially sacrificing the entire crew.
She
and
does.
it's just because
Yeah.
Troy is a slightly more empathetic person, she is willing to say we will take this to the last moment. So
Well,
I don't think she's completely inept. I think she's driven by more empathy than say someone who isn't in that position of power. But
I think
feels like it should be.
I think there are things to factor in, like early on when she says, I feel like there are still people alive on this ship. You have to take into account the fact that she is an empath to some degree, and maybe she can feel that there are still other people on this ship, however faintly, whether that's something she's certain about or not. She's probably got more insight if there's people alive on this ship than than Rolaren does. But also, yeah, there's technically nothing wrong with the arguments that Rolaren makes, but the point is that it's the difference between here is the information for you, the captain, to make a decision based on, versus what this ensign is doing, which is I'm telling you what you should do, and like being pissed off if you don't agree with me about it, with the way she's conveying the information in a way that I do not think she would do with Picard. It's I've sensed that I think I can push you my way a little easier. I'm gonna go for it. And I do respect that, like, when push comes to shove, I do really like how Troy's actress plays through the no, we do not eject the saucer until I say so. Is that clear? And like a really nice little choice I think they made around that is the first time that she actually sits in the captain's chair is after she's had that moment of no, we do not detect this saucer until I say so. I am captain. Is that clear? It's her first moment of feeling like she's ready to fill that chair, and I like that.
Yeah, and I do think there's probably an element there that I think is presented fairly subtly and I think correctly in that way, that Rolaren is kind of panicking, right? She's kind of making decisions based on this, and Troy is someone who would be able to sense that and understand that, and would sense that O'Brien, who has fought all the Cardassians, is a non-commissioned officer who's been there for like 2 decades at this point or whatever, is probably going to have a slightly better grasp of stressful situations and be a little bit more measured. So when he's saying, no, we're not in any danger until it gets to, the containment field gets to 15% or whatever.
Yeah.
She's going to go, cool. Yeah. Whereas she's going to sit there going, I think Ensign Rose like having a bit of a moment here.
Yeah, as an ensign, you're probably a little less prepared to. You've had a few fewer risk your life for the sake of the crew moments. What is the thing that's going to keep me alive most is probably a little further up on your mind.
And also, Ensign Rose does become a marquee in Deep Space Nine, so there was an element of she just has that streak of, why don't we just kill everyone if it maintains our goals? But I think one of the things I really liked about that whole setup that it probably isn't chained throughout the episode in all the different groups, but I did like how essentially that group was helping another one without either of them really knowing that's happening. Like they would we have to bank on this idea that someone's going to get to engineering and be able to see the thing we need them to see, without knowing that at that point Riker and Data are traveling towards engineering, which I do need to make a point about, right? Yeah. So they're in 10 forward, everything's gone down, and they've basically gone, look, we need to get to engineering. Worf, Keiko, you deal with things here. We're going to set up like a hospital here, rather, because sick bay is inaccessible or something. And Data's like, oh yes, well the route to engineering is blocked, but we can get through some service crawlways. And I'm just like, when did these become Geoffrey's tubes? Because I remember them being Geoffrey's tubes. I want to know where my tubes are.
I'm assuming the difference between a Geoffrey's tube and a service crawlway is the service crawlways have electrical dangerous things in the middle of them, but a Geoffrey's tube does not.
So Geoffrey's tube is just like, this is another way to get between decks.
Yes, but one without electricity in it. Yeah. Just random arcing electricity for important reasons, I'm sure.
Yeah. Which also feels a bit unfair to put Jonathan Frakes through that, given what we know about his back. It's like, all right, mate, you're going to spend most of this episode crawling next to Brent Spiner.
Oh, I've just had a thought. I want to rewind back slightly to the bridge. Okay. There is one thing I really like about Rolaren that I want to say before I forget, which is, for all of she is essentially the antagonist, I guess, on the bridge, or the obstacle that Troy's having to overcome. I do really like that the first bit of impact that Rolaren has on the episode is breaking the rules in a way that is really useful and gets the engineering console up and running. It does really establish you can't completely overwrite, like, you can't completely overlook her as, like, being useful and having good insights that aren't what... You can't entirely listen to what O'Brien says. You wouldn't have gotten this progress by listening to just O'Brien. It does create a little bit of tension that I think is really important to that bridge story.
Yeah, and it's also really funny that O'Brien's like complaining about improper engineering procedures
Yeah.
when he spends like 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine just holding that space station together with like chewing gum. Like, and he's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
you can't do that. That's not correct." And it's like, mate, you were literally just like duct taping holes in space in a few years. Like, what are you chatting about, mate? Like, it's
Uh,
yeah, I,
but
I think that I think all these dynamics work really well
yeah.
because they're apart from maybe Crusher and Geordie. I just think that's a little bit too like everything's fine, we're cool, but it's still nice to see them interacting in a way they don't normally,
Yeah.
unless maybe they're in the films.
The,
But like, I think all of the little clusters work really well
the
together.
Crusher and Geordie one isn't bad. It's just kind of so-so. I want to give my one bit of praise for the Crusher and Geordie storyline, and that is, I really like that. So there's a fire in the cargo bay. It's a plasma fire, and there's explosive barrels. So they're gonna move the barrels away or whatever. And they eventually decide we're gonna vent the oxygen. We're gonna vent the oxygen completely out of the room, and then that'll put the fire out, etc. I really like that Crusher A talks through the specifics of it's not just as casual as hold on to something and it will be fine. It's like no, there's going to be the vacuum of space in here. These are like you're going to have to resist the urge to breathe out when you feel the massive pressure happen. But I also really respect that the timeline she gives of like 15 seconds of useful consciousness, 10 seconds of delirium. That's all we've got. That they play it perfectly to the actual time. They have 10 seconds of screened episode in which they are usefully in the void. 10 second. I think they use 8 of their 10 seconds of delirium stumbling over and just about getting the switch. They do it in under the 25 seconds that she gives for that's when we're going to lose consciousness entirely. I'm so glad they actually did 25 real seconds and not bullshit movie seconds.
And that's like because normally when you see that, it's like we got 3 minutes to defuse the bomb, and they
Yeah.
show the counter, right? And for 7 minutes it takes
Yeah.
to. I, so I will say that holding your breath in the vacuum of space is like one of
Yeah.
the worst things you could do, which was quite funny. I
No,
did also think it
agreed,
was
but
quite, and I understand why this is happening. This
yeah.
is early '90s production. I did
Yeah.
find it quite funny that this explosive decompression was like a minor inconvenience to them, and they could just hold on to it,
No,
which
but
is very.
I do like
I
that they
really
at least established in universe what is the answer, and that they tried to have a there are gonna be steps you have to like that you have to do. I like that there was some thought, even if the thought was wrong.
But what I do really like about that section is that it is completely disconnected from everyone else, and
Mm.
it's so you've got obviously Worf and Keiko aren't really linked to the other groups, but they are one of the groups that is splintered from
Yeah.
Riker and Data, and the Riker and Data are inadvertently working with the bridge. But you've got Geordie and Crusher, who are both trying to avert something that is just as catastrophic
Yeah.
and that no one else knows about. There's no one else that can influence
Yeah.
that in any way. Like if that fire hits those barrels, the ship is going to explode, and no one else knows that. I do like that. I think that justifies that section.
Yeah. And
But I do think it's the slightly goofier of
yeah.
all four.
And I do like that across the various sections there is such a wild mix of who is aware of what levels of personal to overall threat. Because like obviously the Picard section is the individual safety of like 4 people. You've got the bridge and Data and Riker that are a ship-wide threat. You've got a separate ship-wide threat, but then you've got the individual threat again of the safety of Keiko's pregnancy. It's all different scales of threat that all feel equally important to each other, and that's really nice.
Well, you've also got those like smaller moments as well, like when Data's about to jump into that electricity stream or whatever,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Riker, mate, you could just take off my head if you want." And Riker's a bit like, "No, I don't really want to do that, Data. that sounds horrible." And then you do have him just walking away. We don't see him walking around with Data's head, but there's the implication that he's taking a bit of a stroll with Data's head. So you get these like it's not all here is unbearable tension of either this
Yeah.
lift is about to drop, like they're well out of the lift when that falls down.
But,
The the only real
yeah.
tension you get is we are approaching that 15% containment field level that's going to destroy the ship, and and that's about it. You have room for goofiness, more
Yeah.
characterful, funny moments, including, but so like Keiko going into labour is like the most
Yes.
cliched
Yes.
sitcom 90s TV thing in the world. But then you add Worf
Ah.
awkwardly saying to her, "You may give birth now," and walking and trying to
I
deliver her
I
baby,
love
which
Doctor
really
Worf so much. I wrote down so
yeah.
many Doctor Worf quotes. Um, yes, you bore the pain well. Yes. You cannot go into
what
labour
was
right now, Keiko. It is not a good time.
yeah. And there's another one like where he's like the simulation was not as irregular as this or something. And it's but the only thing I'll say, so I think there's like a slightly negative view of Keiko as a character. It's only once she gets to Deep Space Nine,
Yeah.
which I think is a bit unfair, but also like she can be a bit naggy. But first, I think Rosalind Chow is terrific in that role. I do think the Hollywood "I'm giving birth" verges a little bit too much on sex noises, and it's
Yeah.
not something I'd necessarily want to say watch in a room where someone else is on the other side of a thin wall.
Oh yeah.
because that is those like groans and
Yeah.
moans of labour were a bit too orgasmic, I think I would say.
Maybe,
Like,
but again,
but I think that works again with
yeah.
the contrast of Worf is so unbearably awkward
Worf
about this
makes
whole
those
thing.
scenes what they are. Like one of my
Yeah.
favorites might be where Keiko's like, she's concerned and going, can you check if the baby's turned round? Like at the scan a couple of days ago, they were still feet first, and that might be a problem. And Worf responds with, "Can't you tell? Can't you just Keiko? Why can you not simply feel if the baby has rotated?"
It's amazing because like the suggestion is that he's trained to do this, and yet he is taken by surprise by every single step of this pregnancy process. I was like, oh, the next step is bearing down. He's like, I fucking know. What? Like, why are you telling me to push? I know I'm supposed to push. Um,
Why
yeah, but
is it
I
not
really like.
begun?
Yeah, but I really like how they don't linger too long on any section, right? You're
Yeah.
going to sit there with Picard and his kids and his jacket, and you're going to be like, oh, I'm a bit fed up. And then you're going to be shot through to Data and Riker doing like the serious Star Trek stuff. And then this is getting a bit tense. It's like, right, we're off to see Worf staring at Keiko's undercarriage while a baby pops out of it.
I I also really like their commitment to the different ways that the different groups assume or don't assume shared knowledge across the storylines. Because like while everyone on the bridge is very like, we're going to assume that there are people alive elsewhere in the ship that can see a message in engineering and do something about it. The other side of that equation, Riker and Data in the corridors, they explicitly say we have to assume that the saucer has been destroyed and that the command structure is gone. We have to act assuming we are now command and that we have to work on that. The pair in the cargo bay do not verbalize an opinion either way. It does not matter whether command is alive. It does not matter whether command is dead. They can't reach the rest of the ship. It doesn't matter what the rest of the ship's going on if they don't do their thing. Yet again, Picard does not think about anything other than these three children because it is clear that they're not going to be able to get themselves to safety in this moment. Like that is his entire problem, regardless of anyone else's safety level. That lack of of the different ways people assume or don't assume, it's a really neat bit of flavor.
Yeah, and I think that's where like the previous 5 seasons come into this really nicely, and how
Yeah.
character-driven Star Trek does that. Because like you look at Troy, she's an empathetic person, even without sensing that people are alive. She's going to fall on that side of we're going to give everyone else as much of a chance as possible.
Yeah.
Data and Riker are Starfleet to the core. They're going to be like, look, we have procedures here. We're going to have to just assume that everyone on the bridge is dead, and it's up to us to solve any issues. Then you've got Geordie and Crusher, who are very kind of science engineer driven. They go like, we've got a problem in front of us, and that's what we can solve. We can't really do anything else. This has to be our focus. And then Picard's just like, well, this elevator is my ship now, and I guess you're my crew, and the only thing I care about is getting my crew to safety. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to do. And then 10 forward is 10 forward. I mean, I don't know how
Yeah.
we could categorize that outside
Yeah.
of Worf's just a guy who does not know how to human. What I really, you might not remember this, but I really like that Worf delivers their baby does come up again in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Which also makes sense because this is a Ronald D. Moore episode. And obviously Ronald D. Moore, showrunner of Deep Space Nine. But, I think that's kind of what really kind of works with this episode, is that everything is driven by the character that we already know all these characters have.
Yeah.
And we can immediately and intrinsically understand why they're making the decisions they're making. And we've even seen like Ro Laren, like she's had that disrespect of command previously with Picard, and Picard kind of ironed it out of her. And so she can't get away with it with Picard anymore. But it re-emerges here because she doesn't initially respect Troy. I mean, she does by the end of the episode, I guess. But so I really do think we are given. This is built on a context that we've had for 5 seasons already, but also is perfectly easy to pass coming into this for one episode at a time, as we often do. But yeah, I agree. I think the way everything intersects is done really, really well.
I also keep thinking about some nice little parallels that this does that I think are subtle but do nice stuff for the story. One of the ones that's just come to mind is we have 2 different storylines in this that are about a captain facing pushback from their crew, sort of pushing back on their orders and not quite respecting them. Because we got the obvious one with Troy and Ro Laren, but we also have that repeated with Picard and the children, and it's such a differently handled version when you get, the children being like, I don't want to be an officer anymore. No, you're officers, you've got orders, and Melissa takes up this role to be like, I am going to stand up to you and go, no, we are refusing this order, in a way that is like, it clearly has very different weight, and at least part of the response is because this is children. I'm not going to be able to shout them into doing what I need them to do. But also, those children are objectively right. Picard, you're going to be a little slow climbing the ladder, but like, that's better than you dying. Like, oh.
Well, and it's also that they do fundamentally need him because he's the one who knows how to like do all the buttons on the doors to try and manage it. I think you're right, and I had not made any note of this, but I do think it's really interesting, like the contrast between because it does show you how unreasonable in places Ensign Ro is being when we're able to compare her with the children who are also not really following orders.
There is a difference, I think, fundamentally between I'm refusing to listen to orders because I'm not going to let someone die because I am scared and I want to save myself. Because like that's the children are like, we don't care if we get to safety. We're not going to let our desire to get out of a scary situation force us to in fear sacrifice someone else's safety, which is fundamentally what I think Ro Laren is doing. She is being willing to potentially sacrifice the other people on the ship because she is scared and she would like to take the plan of action that gets her to safety.
Yeah, it's like that. I do think it is a deliberate, writing device that even if we don't see it, because she is fundamentally a Starfleet officer, that she is panicking and she's making these panic decisions and panic statements that everyone else is kind of humouring to an extent because you can't let the situation spiral by going like you're panicking, snap out of it. Whereas with kids you kind of can do that. You kind of can just say, oh no, this is how you're feeling right now and this is what we need to do and this is how we're going to work through that. You can't do that with an adult because they're going to go, I'm not panicking, shut up.
No.
I think Ensign Ro is presented as this antagonist, but when you understand that she's just really, really scared and is kind of self-serving, it feels a bit more human than just I'm here to be a bit of shit.
Yes. Oh, this is just a really nice episode. This is a really
just
good
a really
one.
simple Star Trek episode, just a really solid The Next Generation, we've been around for 5 seasons episode. Keiko O'Brien's there, Chief O'Brien's there. He's not gone on to Deep Space Nine yet. That's always a measure that we're probably going to have a decent time. Again, really big fans of Colin Meaney and Rosalind Chow. I think they work really well. And I think all the performances in this are pretty good. I don't think the characters are always particularly well formed in the Next Generation at times, especially the women. I think Troy and Crusher can be a bit. I mean, I am not unconvinced that the Crusher fucks a ghost wasn't conceived like before the series started, and it's like, we're just going to have this character here so she can fuck a ghost, all right? And then everything after that is just like, yeah, whatever, just put her in a room with Geordie, it doesn't matter. But I think it's one of the few episodes that really, really works. Just knocked my laptop. Works through all of the characters and their established characters.
Yeah,
really, really well.
I think that both of the season 5 episodes we've rolled so far have shown that season 5 has been really good at standalone episodes that don't really have to do anything with the wider overall plot, but still feel like you would never tell someone to skip this episode in a watching order, that have a good amount of screen time for a good amount of the broadcast, and allow each of them to have their unique moments. Yeah, this is really, just 2 episodes has really been enough to make me really appreciate season 5 as a point where TNG has really found its footing and feels comfortable just doing little one-off stories that are really solid.
Yeah. I mean, it's so established that it can just say, we've put the work in to develop these characters, and so we can reward people who are watching all of this with, you already know how these characters are going to behave. You will understand everything we put down because of that. But before, it has to think about, how do we close these characters' arcs, which arguably it never does, apart from maybe Picard. But I think also we can be skewed by modern Trek a bit, because this is what Star Trek just does at this stage, right? The vast majority of episodes are these standalone little episodes where something happens, and by the end of the episode, everything's kind of back to normal. It's very rare that we get these overarching narratives until we get to Deep Space Nine, and probably Deep Space Nine, like series 3 or 4.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that makes Star Trek really, really fun to dip in and out of, in a way that maybe, modern Trek, and here it comes, something like Picard can't manage. There you go, I got it in like right at the end. But yeah, no, I just think season 5 of, and again, I'm on a roll here of rolling season 5, so hopefully next time we'll get unification. But season 5 is just like peak Next Generation of, like, we know what we're doing, we have no real limits on what we have to do here. There's no kind of consideration on how this ends. It's just, we're just going to lay down 24 to 26 really, really solid episodes of Picard and his jacket. I just want to see that jacket again. It's a really hideous jacket, but I kind of want one.
It's kind of great.
Yeah, it's very smoking jacket, which I don't really get where that comes from. It's like, we've got to give Picard something slightly more casual, because she was complaining that it's like really tight leotard that he has to wear is uncomfortable.
There's going to be children here. He's got to be on his off day. He's not in military mode.
Yeah. There's children here. Let's give him like a Hugh Hefner jacket, like a space Hugh Hefner.
So yeah, I think this is going to be another one of those shorter ones, because when it's just a nice episode, it's easy to just go, yeah, that was all pretty good.
Well, that provides a nice balance to the fact we spent like an hour and a half complaining about the Ben Sisko tribute episode of Academy. we were here for so long.
We were here for a while. It's nice to have a nice
most of it me shouting.
I think we had a reasonably even amount of stuff to say. I don't think it was too much you just going off.
There were a couple of I had to transcribe that one. There were a couple of occasions where I was going like, all right, Geoffrey, you can bring it in a bit now.
Look, sometimes you feel passionate about an episode. I'm sure there will be some where I will go off on one.
Oh, I'm assuming that whenever we eventually roll, or you bring the Tuvix episode, it's going to be like an hour of you talking and me going, yeah, you're absolutely right, Laura.
Well, that'll be nice, because usually I get 2 words into it, and the other person will be like, no, I think it's great they killed him. I'll be like, oh.
It'll just be me listening to you, and then like right there going, "Hang on, I just need to say something about Picard."
Well, thank you everyone for watching another episode of Wegba? Is that what
Wegba.
Wegba. I gotta
You'll
pronounce
get it.
this. Wegba. Thank you for watching another episode of Wegba. Geoffrey, where are you out on the internet?
I'm on at geoffreybunting.co.uk as always.
That's where you can be found. I'm at Laura K Buzz. Patreon's the one where all the stuff ends up. $1 a month really helps. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with some more Star Trek of some kind. Thank you very
you're
much.
rolling this one.
Yeah, let's cross my fingers for, I don't know, the Star Trek the Animated Series. Goodbye.
Bye.